Should be live any second now. Wait for YouTube to catch up to itself. Come on, you can do it. There we go. Alright, so YouTube, or my internet has been funny today. It seems to be fine right now. Hopefully it won't have any issues. Let's go ahead and hop right back in to discussing the SEP entry on feminist perspectives on sex and gender. We're on section 4.1, gender nominalism. So, gendered social series. Iris Young argues that unless there is, quote, some sense in which, quote, women, unquote, is the name of a social collective that feminism represents, there is nothing specific to feminist politics, unquote. 1997, page 13. In order to make the category women intelligible, she argues that women make up a series, a particular kind of social collective, quote, whose members are unified passively by the objects their actions are oriented around and or by the objectified results of the material effects of the actions of the other, unquote. Young, 1997, page 23. A series is distinct from a group in that, whereas members of groups are thought to self-consciously share certain goals, projects, traits, and or self-conceptions, members of series pursue their own individual ends without necessarily having anything at all in common. Young holds that women are not bound together by a shared feature or experience, or set of features and experiences, since she takes Spellman's particularity argument to have established definitively that no such feature exists. 1997, page 13. See also Fry, 1996, and Hayes, 2000. Instead, women's category is unified by certain practico-inert realities, or the ways in which women's lives and their actions are oriented around certain objects and everyday realities. Young, 1997, pages 23 through 4. For example, bus commuters make up a series unified through their individual actions being organized around the same practico-inert objects of the bus and the practice of public transport. Women make up a series unified through women's lives and actions being organized around certain practico-inert objects and realities that position them as women. Young identifies two broad groups of such practico-inert objects and realities. First, phenomena associated with female bodies, physical facts, biological processes that take place in female bodies, menstruation, pregnancy, childbirth, and social rules associated with these biological processes, social rules of menstruation, for instance. Second, gender-coded objects and practices, pronouns, verbal and visual representations of gender, gender-coded artifacts in social spaces, clothes, cosmetic, tools, and furniture. So, women make up a series since their lives and actions are organized around female bodies and certain gender-coded objects. Their series is bound together passively, and the unity is, quote, not one that arises from the individuals called women, unquote. Young, 1997, pages 32. I'm unfamiliar with this kind of language, the series language. This is new to me. I'll have to read up on it a little bit more. Although Young's proposal purports to be a response to Spellman's worries, Stone has questioned whether it is, after all, susceptible to the particularity argument. Ultimately, on Young's view, something women as women share, their practical inert realities, binds them together. Stone, 2004. Resemblance nominalism. Natalie Stollier holds that unless the category of women is unified, I hope I'm pronouncing that last name right, it's probably Stollier, holds that unless the category of women is unified, feminist action on behalf of women cannot be justified. 1995, pages 282. Stollier, too, is persuaded by the thought that women qua women do not share anything unitary. This prompts her to argue for resemblance nominalism. This is the view that a certain kind of resemblance relation holds between entities of a particular type. For more on resemblance nominalism, see Armstrong, 1989, pages 39 through 58. Stollier is not alone in arguing for resemblance to relations to make sense of women as a category. Others have done so, usually appealing to Wittgenstein's quote, family resemblance, unquote, relations. Alcoff, 1988, Green and Radford Curry, 1991, Hayes, 2000, Monroe, 2006. Stollier relies more on Price's resemblance nominalism, whereby X is a member of some type F, okay? Whereby X is a member of some type F only if X resembles some paradigm or exemplar of F sufficiently closely. Price, 1953, 20, page 20. For instance, the type of red entities is unified by some chosen red paradigms, so that only those entities that sufficiently resemble the paradigms count as red. The type or category of women, then, is unified by some by some chosen woman paradigms so that those who sufficiently resemble the woman paradigms count as women. Stolier, 1995, page 284. So I think, this is my guess, that what they're getting at, so what's an athlete? How many push-ups do you have to do to be an athlete? What's your BMI need to be? How fast does your mile need to be? There's no clearly defined set of things that have to be the case to be an athlete. And yet, if you ask almost anyone in the United States, is LeBron James an athlete? You're going to get very, consistent responses. Yes. And so there's this idea that there's almost like an archetypical athlete, like the perfected athlete, as it were, the platonic ideal of athlete. And you can kind of get closer to that ideal. And if you're close enough at some arbitrary point, we're like, oh, there's an athlete. And then if you're far enough at some arbitrary point, we're like, nah, not really an athlete. But of course, there's a middle ground of like where nothing in particular can be said for sure about, you can't strictly argue if what particular person is an athlete or not. So I think that's the idea that they're getting at here, is that you can sort of have this sort of notion of it says paradigm or exemplar, some sort of archetype of womanhood, and if you're close enough to that, you're a woman. But again, this would indicate, what I think this is really getting at is a matter of spectrum. Like, with respect to being an athlete, you can be more of an athlete or less of an athlete, you can be more or less athletic. So I think what this is really would be once again opening up a spectrum again, where you could imagine sort of archetypical men and an archetypical man and an archetypical woman at sort of opposite ends of the spectrum. No one in real life ever actually being those perfectly, but then somewhere along there between those two lines. And so I don't know if this is what Stolier would say. I don't know if Stolier would have some sort of arbitrary cutoff point. I need to read it a little bit more. But let's go ahead and dig a little bit more into this. Semantic considerations about the concept of woman suggest to Stolier that resemblance nominalism should be endorsed. Stolier, 2008, page 28. It seems unlikely that the concept is applied on the basis of some single social feature all and only women possess. By contrast, woman is a cluster concept, and our attributions of womanhood pick out, quote, different arrangements of features in different individuals, unquote. Yeah, so remember I said this in a previous video. What if someone is super, super into both, like, embroidery, but also monster trucks? There are sort of a variety of features that we sort of cluster concepts. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we associate with being men and women that may or may not be strictly necessary for a woman. And so these ideas are really just picking out clusters of related ideas, but you don't necessarily, there's no like one thing. I wonder if that's the direction Stolier's going. If so, that's interesting, and I could sort of see her point to some degree. More specifically, they pick out the following clusters of features. A, female sex. B, phenomenological features, menstruation, female sexual experience, childbirth, breastfeeding, fear of walking in the streets at night or fear of rape. C, certain roles, wearing typically female clothing, being oppressed on the basis of one's sex or undertaking care work. D, gender attribution, quote, calling oneself a woman, being called a woman, unquote. Stolier, 1995, pages 283 through 4. For Stolier, attributions of womanhood are to do with a variety of traits and experiences that those feminists have historically termed gender traits. Quote, gender traits, unquote, like social behavior or psychological traits, and those terms, quote, sex traits, unquote. Nonetheless, she holds that since the concept woman applies to at least some MTF trans persons, one can be a woman without being female. Stolier, 1995, page 282. The cluster concept woman does not, however, straightforwardly provide the criteria for picking out the category of woman. Well, same thing with athlete, of course. Rather, the four clusters of features that the concept picks out help single out women paradigms that in turn help single out the category of women. First, any individual who possesses a feature from at least three of the four clusters mentioned will count as an example of the category. Again, why at least three of the four? Why not two? Like, why? Again, arbitrary cutoff points. For instance, an African American with primary and secondary female sex characteristics who describes herself as a woman and is oppressed on the basis of sex, along with a white European hermaphrodite brought up, quote, as a girl, unquote, who engages in female roles and has female phenomenological features despite lacking female sex characteristics, will count as woman paradigms, according to that's Stolier, 1995, page 284. Second, any individual who resembles, quote, any of the paradigms sufficiently closely on Price's account, as closely as the paradigms resemble each other, will be a member of the resemblance class, quote, woman, unquote, unquote. Sawyer, 1995, page 284. That is, what delimits membership in the category of woman is what one resembles sufficiently as a woman paradigm. So again, and we do this with an athlete. Like, who's an athlete? Well, whoever resembles our idea of an athlete enough. Again, I would need to read a little bit more on Stollier. I have a feeling that that's kind of the idea that she's getting at here. That's my guess. Let's go ahead and continue. 4.2, Neo-Gender Realism. In a series of articles collected in her book of 2012, Sally Haslanger argues for a way to define the concept of woman that is politically useful, serving as a tool in feminist fights against sexism, and that shows woman to be a social, not a biological notion. More specifically, Haslanger argues that gender is a matter of occupying either a subordinate or privileged position. In some articles, Haslanger is arguing for a revisionary analysis of the concept woman, 2000b, 2003a, 2003b. Elsewhere, she suggests that her analysis may not be that revisionary after all, 2005, 2006. Consider the former argument first. Haslanger's analysis is, in her term, ameliorative. It aims to elucidate which gender concepts best help feminists achieve their legitimate purposes, thereby elucidating those concepts feminists should be using. Haslanger, 2000b, page 33. Now, feminists need gender terminology in order to fight sexist injustices. Haslanger, 2000b, page 36. In particular, they need gender terms to identify, explain, and talk about persistent social inequalities between males and females. Haslanger's analysis of gender begins with the recognition that females and males differ in two respects: physically and in their social positions. Societies in general tend to, quote, privilege male individuals with male bodies, unquote. Haslanger, 2000b, page 38. So that the social positions they subsequently occupy are better than the social positions of those with female bodies. And this generates persistent sexist injustices. With this in mind, Haslanger specifies how she understands genders. S is a woman if, and I believe it's been a minute since my logic, but I believe if with two F's is if and only if. By definition, S is systematically subordinated along some dimension, economic, political, legal, social, etc., and S is, quote, marked, unquote, as a target for this treatment by observed or imagined bodily features presumed to be evidence of a female's biological role in reproduction. S is a man, if and only if, by definition. S is systematically privileged along some dimension, economic, political, legal, social, etc., and S is, quote, marked, unquote, as a target for this treatment by observed or imagined bodily features presumed to be evidence of a male's biological role in reproduction. I wonder if that's 2000A 67. I wonder if this would be vulnerable to critiques that if someone was sufficiently it's an interesting question, like, would the Queen of England be a woman in this case? I'm trying to think, because it's hard to say the Queen of England is like subordinated economically, politically, legally, or socially. I don't know, have to think about that. Need to chew on that for a bit. These are constitutive of being a woman and a man. What makes S a woman apt is that S is oppressed on sex-marked grounds. What makes calling S a man apt is that S is privileged on sex-marked grounds. Haslanger's ameliorative analysis is counterintuitive in that females who are not sex-marked for oppression do not count as women. I swear to goodness I didn't read down any further. That's very funny. Okay. Glad to know that we're on the same page. Maybe I saw it on like the corner of my eye and I subconsciously picked up on it. I swear I didn't read beyond though. At least arguably, the Queen of England is not oppressed on sex-marked grounds, and so would not count as a woman in Haslanger's definition. Okay, there we go. That's very funny. And similarly, all males who are not privileged would not count as men. This might suggest that Haslanger's analysis should be rejected, and that it does not capture what language users have in mind when applying gender terms. However, Hoslinger argues that this is not a reason to reject the definitions, which he takes to be revisionary. They are not meant to capture our intuitive gender terms. In response, Mikola 2009 has argued that revisionary analyses of gender concepts, like Hoslinger's, are both politically unhelpful and philosophically unnecessary. Just checking in. Let's see, OBS is behaving itself. Very good. YouTube is behaving itself. Very good. That is good to know. Note also that Hoslinger's proposal is eliminativist. Gender justice would eradicate gender, since it would abolish the sexist social structures responsible for sex-marked oppression and privilege. If sexist oppression were to cease, men and women were no longer to exist, although there would still be males and females. Not all feminists endorse such an eliminativist's view, though. Stone holds that Hoslinger does not leave any room for positively revaluing what it is to be a woman, since Hoslinger defines woman in terms of subordination. Quote, any woman who challenges her subordinate status must be by definition challenging her status as a woman, even if she does not intend to. Positive change to our gender norms would involve getting rid of the necessarily subordinate feminine gender, Stone 2007, page 160. But according to Stone, this is not only undesirable, one should be able to challenge subordination without having to challenge one's status as a woman. It is also false, quote, because norms of femininity can be and are constantly are being revised. Women can be women without therefore being subordinate, unquote. Stone 2007, page 162. Mikola 2016 also argues that Hoslinger's eliminativism is undesirable. Drink of water. All right. Theodore Bach also holds that Hoslinger's eliminativism is undesirable. However, in his view, Hoslinger's position faces another more serious problem. Feminism faces the following worries, among others. Representation problem. Quote, if there is no real group of, quote, women, unquote, then it is incoherent to make moral claims and advance political theories on behalf of women, unquote. Bach, 2002, 2034. Page 2034. Commonality problems. 1. There is no feature that all women cross-culturally and trans-historically share. 2. Delimiting women's social kind with the help of some essential property privileges those who possess it and marginalizes those who don't. Bach, 2012, page 235. According to Bach, Hoslinger's strategy to resolve these problems appeals to, quote, social objectivism, unquote. First, we define women according to a quote, according to a suitably abstract relational property, unquote. Bach, 2002, page 2036, which avoids the commonality problems. Second, Hoslinger employs, quote, an ontologically thin notion of, quote, objectivity, unquote, unquote. Bach, 2012, page 2036. Excuse me. That answers the representation problem. Hoslinger's solution, Bach holds, is specifically to argue that women make up an objective type because women are objectively similar to one another, and not simply classified together given our background conceptual schemes. Bach claims that though Hoslinger's account is not objective enough, and we should, on political grounds, quote, provide a stronger ontological characterization of the genders men and women, according to which they are natural kinds with explanatory essences, unquote. Bach, 2012, page 238. He thus proposes that women make up a natural kind with a historical essence. Quote, the historical property of women, in virtue of which an individual is a member of the kind, women, is a participation in a, and women is also in quotes, within the quote, is participation in a lineage of women. In order to exemplify this relational property, an individual must be a reproduction of ancestral women, in which case she must have undergone the ontogenetic processes through which a historical gender system replicates women. Bach, 2012, page 271. Not 100% sure what he's saying here. In short, one is not a woman due to shared surface properties with other women, like occupying a subordinate social position. Rather, one is a woman because has the right history. One has undergone the ubiquitous ontogenetic process of gender socialization. Thinking about gender in this way supposedly provides a stronger kind unity than Hoslinger's that simply appeals to shared surface properties. Whoops. There we go. Bach's view, however, has anti-trans implications. After all, trans women who have not undergone female gender socialization won't count on women as women on his view. Mikola, 2016, develops this line of critique in detail. More worryingly, trans women will count as men contrary to their self-identification. Both Boettcher, 2013, and Jenkins, 2016, consider the importance of gender self-identification. Boettcher argues that there is more than one, quote, correct, unquote, way to understand womanhood. At the very least, the dominant mainstream and the resistant trans conceptions. Dominant views like that of Bach's tend to erase trans people's experiences and to marginalize trans women within feminist movements. Rather than trans women having to defend their self-identifying claims, these claims should be taken at face value right from the start. And so, Boettcher holds, quote, in analyzing the meaning of terms such as, quote, woman, unquote, it is inappropriate to dismiss alternative ways in which those terms are actually used in trans subcultures. Such usage needs to be taken into consideration as part of the analysis, unquote, 2013, page 235. Specifically with Hosslanger in mind, in a similar vein, Jenkins, 2016, discusses how Hosslanger's revisionary approach unduly excludes some trans women from women's social kind. On Jenkins' view, Hosslanger's ameliorative methodology, in fact, yields more than one satisfying target concept. One that corresponds to Hosslanger's proposed concept, and captures the sense of gender as an imposed social class, unquote. Another that, quote, captures the sense of gender as a lived identity, unquote. Jenkins, 2016, page 397. The latter of these allows us to include trans women into women's social kind, who on Hosslanger's social class approach to gender would inappropriately have been excluded. Sorry, my brain just turned right off there. Where are we? Here we are. In addition to her revisionary argument, Hosslanger has suggested that her ameliorative analysis of woman may not be as revisionary as it first seems, 2005-2006. Although successful in their reference fixing, ordinary language users do not always know precisely what they are talking about. Very true. Our language use may be skewed by oppressive ideologies that, quote, that can, quote, mislead us about the content of our own thoughts, unquote, Hosslanger, 2005. Although her gender terminology is not intuitive, this could simply be because oppressive ideologies mislead us about the meanings of our gender terms. Our everyday gender terminology might mean something utterly different from what we think it means, and we could be entirely ignorant of this. Perhaps Hosslanger's analysis then has captured our everyday gender vocabulary, revealing to us the terms that we actually employ. We may be applying, quote, woman, unquote, in our everyday language on the basis of sex-marked subordination, whether we take ourselves to be doing so or not. If this is so, Hosslanger's gender terminology is not radically revisionist. Saul, 2006, argues that despite it being possible that we unknowingly apply, quote, woman, unquote, on the basis of social subordination, it is extremely difficult to show that this is the case. This would require showing that the gender terminology we in fact employ is Hosslanger's proposed gender terminology. But discovering the grounds in which we apply everyday gender terms is extremely difficult, precisely because they are applied in various idiosyncratic ways. Saul, 2006, page 126. Hosslanger then needs to do more in order to show that her analysis is non-revisionary. All right, check, make sure OBS is behaving. Yes, very good. Let's see. All right, looks like Facebook is paying attention. Or Facebook, I keep saying Facebook, YouTube. Drink of water. (4.2.2) Gender Unessentialism. Charlotte Witt, 2011, 2000A, 2011B, argues for a particular sort of gender essentialism, which Witt terms unessentialism. Her motivation and starting point is the following. Many ordinary social agents report gender being essential to them and claim that they would be a different person were they of a different sex gender. Unessentialism attempts to understand and articulate this. However, Witt's work departs in important respects from the earlier so-called essentialist or gender realist positions discussed in section 2. Witt does not posit some essential property of womanhood of the kind discussed above, which failed to take women's differences into account. Further, unessentialism differs significantly from those positions developed in response to the problem of how we should conceive of women's social kind. It is not about solving the standard dispute between gender nominalists and gender realists, or about articulating some supposedly shared property that binds women together and provides a theoretical ground for feminist solidarity. Rather, unessentialism aims to make good the widely held belief that gender is constitutive. I think I've been putting an extra syllable in there. Constitutive. Constitutive. One more time. Constitutive. There we go. Constitutive. There we go. Of who we are. Unessentialism is a sort of individual essentialism. Traditionally, philosophers distinguish between kind and individual essentialisms. The former examines what binds members of a kind together, and what do all members of some kind have in common qua members of that kind. The latter asks, what makes an individual the individual it is? What can further distinguish between two sorts of individual essentialisms? Kripkean identity and essentialism and Kripkean identity essentialism and Aristotelian unessentialism. Really given the pronunciation muscles a workout today. The former asks, what makes an individual that individual? The latter, however, asks a slightly different question. What explains the unity of individuals? What explains that an individual entity exists over and above the sum total of its constituent parts? For some reason, I say the word like constitute quite a bit and so forth, but I never constituent parts. I never say this word. The standard feminist debate over gender nominalism and gender realism has largely been about this kind of essentialism. Being about individual essentialism, Witt's unessentialism departs in an important way from the standard debate. From the two individual essentialism, Witt endorses the Aristotelian one. On this view, certain functional essences have a unifying role. These essences are responsible for the fact that material parts constitute a new individual rather than just a lump of stuff or a collection of particles. Witt's example is of a house. The essential house functional property, what the entity is, what its purpose is, unifies the different material parts of a house so that there is a house and not just a collection of house constituting particles. 2011 A, page 6. Gender, being a woman / a man, functions in a similar fashion and provides the, quote, the principle of normative unity, unquote, that organizes, unifies, and determines the roles of social individuals. Witt, 2011, page 73. Due to this, gender is a unessential property of social individuals. I'm going to need to chew on this. I'm not 100%. Aristotelian stuff was never my strong suit. I'm going to have to read through this a little bit more and check up on Charlotte Witt to see what's going on. At any rate, that's enough for right now. A lot of this stuff is kind of heavy, so I like chunking it up. Please do subscribe, give the video a like. That really helps me out. Thank you so much for following along with me today, and I hope that you tune in next time.